Good to have you with us on this Friday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We'll get started this morning with the expected return to U.S. soil of the 3 American soldiers who were killed in a drone attack last Sunday in Jordan.
President Biden and the First Lady plan to be there in Delaware for what's known as the dignified transfer of remains. It'll happen at Dover Air Force Base later today. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin will also be there. Yesterday, he held his first press briefing since his recent hospitalization and apologized for hiding his health issues from the White House and from the public. Austin also said the U.S. was preparing to retaliate against the Iran-backed groups that were behind the drone attack.
Well, this is a dangerous moment in the Middle East. We will continue to work to avoid a wider conflict in the region. But we will take all necessary actions to defend the United States, our interests, and our people. And we will respond when we choose, where we choose, and how we choose. We will have a multi-tiered response, and again, we have the ability to respond a number of times, depending on what the situation is.
NBC News correspondent Aaron Gilchrist joins us now from outside Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. So, Aaron, what can we expect from the president's visit there today and the return of these 3 fallen U.S. soldiers?
Well, Joe and Savannah, today really is about these 3 soldiers being returned here, brought back home to the United States. I think today what you will see is a really dignified, respectful, precision-based movement by the folks here at Dover Air Force Base that is really designed to pay tribute to the people you see on your screens here, Sergeants Rivers, Moffitt, and Sanders. Their bodies will be flown back to the United States. They are being flown back to the United States. And the thing that will be different this time is that, yes, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, will be here along with the families of these soldiers to receive their remains, along with the First Lady and several other people who will participate as dignitaries in this really a ritual. The Air Force doesn't like to refer to it as a ceremony, but it is something, this dignified transfer, where we will see these transfer cases come off of an aircraft and in a very somber, meticulous movement be transferred into vehicles before they're taken to the mortuary affairs unit here to be positively identified and then eventually returned to their families for burial. Joe, Savannah?
Aaron, as we mentioned, and we played a little bit of sound from this a moment ago, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin took questions from the press yesterday. What did we learn about what the U.S. is planning in response to this drone attack?
Well, Savannah, we won't get a lot of detail about what exactly it is that will happen as a response to the deaths of these 3 soldiers and the injuries of the others in Jordan a couple of days ago. But the president has said that he has made his decision about what sort of a response he wants to see. And the Secretary of Defense, you heard there, say that this will be a multi-tiered response that we see. Officials have told NBC News that it will likely be a response that happens over the course of days or weeks. It won't be one action that we see as a result of the plan that's being executed. Typically in these situations, you'll have the commanders on the ground who really have operational decision-making power in terms of when exactly something might happen and what exactly that a strike, for example, might look like. But we do expect, as the Secretary indicated, that there will be a robust response to what happened in Jordan over the weekend.
And Aaron, Secretary Austin also apologized for concealing his recent health issues from the White House. A reminder, he was hospitalized for complications from prostate cancer surgery, didn't tell the president right away. What else is he saying about that?
You're right. The Secretary apologized for keeping so much of that information private. He said that it wouldn't surprise anyone, and it didn't, that he is a private man and thought it best to keep this cancer diagnosis to himself. I do want you to hear a little bit of what he said from the podium at the Pentagon yesterday in talking about this incident. Listen.
I was being treated for prostate cancer. The news shook me. And I know that it shakes so many others, especially in the black community. It was a gut punch. And frankly, my first instinct was to keep it private. I don't think it's news that I'm a pretty private guy. I never liked burdening others with my problems.
And the Secretary went on to say that he understands that in the position that he is in as Secretary of Defense, as a part of the national the Security Council, the president's national security team, he should have been expecting to be less private about this sort of information in the future. We know that the White House has set up protocols that now all cabinet secretaries have to follow, and the Defense Department's internal investigators are looking at what happened, doing a review, and there will be some more decisions to come as a result of that investigation, Joe and Savannah.
All right, Aaron, thank you so much.
Well, in a shocking move against Israel, President Biden has signed an executive order that allows the U.S. to issue sanctions against Israeli settlers occupying the West Bank.
This unprecedented move is the president's most public split yet with Israel since the war with Hamas began in October. The initial round of sanctions was issued against 4 settlers who the U.S. says have committed specific acts of violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. According to the order, all of their assets and bank accounts in the U.S. will be frozen. The executive order also allows the government to impose further sanctions on government officials in Israel.
Let's bring in Hagar Shamali for more on this. She's the former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN, the former NSC director for Syria and Lebanon, also the host of Oh My World on YouTube. Hagar, good morning. First, walk us through the history here of settlers in the West Bank and the tension that has existed throughout that period.
Well, there is a small faction among Israelis and Jews who believe that the entire area should be Israel. And they are dictated by this by looking at biblical times, biblical stories. So they go to those certain areas and establish these settlements. Now, these settlements are illegal. The United States has said that. That's U.S. policy, has always said that we don't support illegal settlement. And the policy of the Israeli government isn't necessarily to support all settlements. Some of them they do, some of them they don't. However, settlers and all Israelis are guaranteed protection by the Israeli state. And that's why when they go and create these settlements, even if they are illegal, they get protection from the military.
This is not the first time President Biden has spoken out about settlers here. What is this saying right now about the relationship between the U.S. and Israel?
So first, you have just what you see on paper, which is a significant move for the U.S. government to actually go out and proactively do something, where they're saying it's not just that we're saying publicly that we're against this in general. They're actually trying to take an action to stop the activity, to tell the Israeli government, you need to help us put an end to this. We've asked you a number of times, and now we're really serious. And this type of action, it not only freezes any assets they have here or prohibits U.S. businesses from doing business with them, it ends up being that it unleashes market forces around the world. So they end up getting isolated from really the entire international financial system. But that said, what the real message here the U.S. government is trying to say is we view this as a national security threat, this behavior, because it prevents the establishment of a Palestinian state, which we believe is a threat to the U.S. national security, foreign policy, and economic interests.
Let's talk while we have you about the latest on hostage negotiations. We understand that Hamas leadership is reviewing the latest version of this potential deal. How much pressure are they under? We know the Israeli government is hearing so much about the hostages. What about Hamas? How much pressure are they under given the humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
That's a great question. Actually, nobody asks me that. And there have been protests inside Gaza, not huge, but still very brave protests of people calling on Hamas to release the hostages because they are sick and tired of the war. And they know that that is at the crux of the real brutality here on Israel's side. And so they also have increased pressure on the Hamas side, but on Hamas's side as well. They know that if the war continues, it will really inevitably undermine their military and governing capabilities. And that's their ultimate goal, is to maintain control over Gaza.
Hagar Shamali, it's always great when you come by. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
It's known as the Pineapple Express, and the first one of the year brought serious floods and heavy rain to California. Now the storm's moving inland, heading toward the Rockies and the Plains today, then the lower Mississippi Valley and Gulf Coast by Saturday.
Meanwhile, California is bracing for another atmospheric river, as they're called. It's on its way early next week. The continuous rainfall on the already saturated ground could potentially produce mudslides, landslides, and flash flooding for the drenched Golden State.
Let's get your full morning news now weather forecast now.
Angie Lastman is here in studio with us. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, good morning, guys. We've got to talk about exactly what's going on with these couple of different storms, because the one that has been impacting California over the past couple of days, we are not done with just yet. You can see there's still some rain occurring across that state, but now the system's on the move, and it's going to impact folks across the Rockies and eventually parts of the plains here in the short term. Long term, we're watching for our next storm system to impact folks across the Golden State. We've got that as a timeline from Sunday through through Tuesday. So that we have a couple more days until we'll have to deal with. But here's the winter alerts from that first storm. Notice we've got plenty of them in effect right now, and they're across much of the west. The storm is going to work its way a little farther to the east today, so we're on tap for some wind, some snow across portions of the Rockies. Travel will be difficult there. And then we'll turn our attention to parts of the south where, specifically in Texas, we could see some of those stronger storms developing this afternoon into this evening. The system moves a little farther to the east here as we get into tomorrow, still dealing with the high rainfall rates from really the Mississippi Valley all the way up into portions of the plains before we finally start to see this thing moving out as we wrap up our weekend, though we'll still see a little bit of that rain draped across portions of the southeast. Here's the area to watch for some of those stronger storms today. It's the hail, it's the winds that'll be on tap for those potential impacts. The tornado risk is low, but it isn't zero, of course. Abilene down to Del Rio and out towards San Antonio has the best chance to see some of that, those stronger storms developing. And then we gear up for this second storm system that's going to hit the west. Here's the deal. This is going to pack a punch. We've got some really impressive rainfall rates potentially on tap for this. We've already got saturated grounds across this area. It isn't hard for us to see flooding as it is normally. So we'll watch for the already soaked soil and the heavy rainfall to bring us another chance of some really difficult conditions across this region, specifically places like Santa Barbara County, stretching down into Southern California. That's where we'll see those greatest amounts of rainfall between now through Tuesday. Notice it could be a half a foot to up to a foot of rain. We've got that bullseye really across portions of Southern California. And when it comes to the snow, I know this will be welcome for portions of the Sierra Mountains. We could see over 4 feet. Great for those ski resorts who haven't had a whole lot of snow this season, but it'll be something to watch for sure across that area. And guys, I can't not mention the day that is the bane of all meteorologists' existence. You know, we go to school for this. And
Wow!
Donnie Phil just is born a rodent and apparently an expert. But there it is. There's the celebration of weather. Winter will be here to stay for a little while.
What a crowd.
Or
you don't love a forecast to be a groundhog? You don't think that's a good method?
If he was more accurate, I would give him a little more respect, but I just get 40% accuracy. Yeah. It's not great.
Are we hearing that music?
It's a celebration. Listen, people are excited.
It's an occasion.
Right. Wow, I love it. All right, we will be sure to keep you all updated on what happens there, Angie. Thank you.
Of course.
Well, we have new details about that deadly hangar collapse at the Boise airport that left 3 people dead and 9 others injured.
This morning, investigators are on the scene trying to figure out what caused the fatal collapse. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz has the latest.
Officials working to determine what caused this hangar under construction at the Boise airport to collapse, killing 3 people and injuring 9 others, 5 in critical condition.
Holy
James Quintana witnessed the immediate aftermath, taking this video as he drove by.
It was very, very shocking to see the magnitude of damage and see how big the structure was and how it seemed to have collapsed.
Let's get everyone out of that collapse zone if you can.
Officials described a chaotic scene as authorities responded to emergency calls around 5 Wednesday night.
I don't know what caused it, but I can tell you that it was a pretty global collapse that occurred. The main structural members came down. It was fairly catastrophic.
First responders pulling victims out of the wreckage.
You saw people being rescued?
Yes, absolutely.
Officials have now blocked off the property. They say as many as 30 people were working here at the time of the collapse. The rescue challenging and technical, with some of the victims hoisted out.
This massive crane also collapsing.
They were still working on some of those structural components, tying those together.
The 39,000 square foot steel structure owned by private aircraft company Jackson Jet Center. The company saying in a statement, "Our focus now is on supporting our team and partners during this difficult time." A project manager for the contractor, Big D Builders, telling NBC News all the victims are their employees.
It's overwhelming. It's such a tragedy.
Lots of questions still. Our thanks to Liz Kreutz for that report.
The mother of school shooter Ethan Crumbley took the stand in her involuntary manslaughter trial, a day of stunning testimony. Jennifer Crumbley talked about her son, her actions, and her thoughts about the day of the shooting. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has the latest from court.
I've asked myself if I would have done anything differently, and I wouldn't have.
If you could change what happened, would you?
Oh, absolutely. I wish he would have killed us instead.
Jennifer Crumbley on the stand testifying in her own defense about her relationship with her son, Ethan.
I thought we were pretty close.
And pushing back on prosecutors' core argument that leading up to the 2021 shooting at Oxford High School, she ignored clear signs her son was struggling.
Did you ever believe that your son needed mental health treatment?
No, I mean, there's a couple of times where Ethan had expressed anxiety, not to a level where I felt he needed to go see a psychiatrist or a mental health professional.
She testified school administrators downplayed concerns, including in a meeting with Ethan's guidance counselor the morning of the shooting.
He told us that he didn't feel my son was a risk.
Sean Hopkins telling the jury Monday,
I felt it was better for him to be around peers and people who are his age than to be home alone.
Prosecutors say both of Ethan's parents bought him the gun used in the shooting, but Crumbley saying her husband was responsible for it.
Who is responsible for storing the gun?
My husband is. It was more his thing.
Her testimony following an emotional morning. Several people in the courtroom crying as prosecutors played surveillance video of the deadly shooting.
Because the situation was active and the killing hadn't stopped. You can't stop and render aid.
Our thanks to Maggie Vespa for that report. Defense attorneys finished questioning Jennifer Crumbley yesterday. The prosecution will start its cross-examination this morning. For more on the trial, let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Danny, good morning. So just overall, what were your big takeaways from her day on the stand?
Look, this is a case where the parents have been much maligned, and probably for good reason, because they may have missed some warning signs. But the prosecution in this case has a pretty high hill to climb. So folks out there should not assume that this is going to be a guilty verdict for both mom and dad when dad's trial comes along. The prosecution essentially has to prove that the parents recklessly disregarded red flags and then recklessly allowed their son to get access to a firearm and did so essentially knowingly. So that is not a slam dunk for the prosecution. This kind of theory of responsibility is exceedingly rare. So the defense yesterday had to humanize their client and also dispel the belief that these red flags were known to the mother or that they were even red flags. And the best example is the reported text messages that he believed a poltergeist was in the house. She dismissed that as a running joke between and among the family. Now, there's a credibility issue. Either the jury will believe that or think it's bunk.
Let's talk about the fact that this is somewhat rare, right? I mean, most of the time in a criminal trial, the defendant doesn't testify. What do you make of her ability to essentially help herself here? And do you think she did that yesterday?
She had to testify. Whether it helped her or hurt her, it was really the only option, because this is information you cannot get as the defense from anyone else other than the mother. What was her state of mind? How did she perceive these facts as she received them? And again, I go back to that example. Much has been made of the fact that he repeatedly texted his parents, there's someone in the house, things are flying off the shelves. Her response was, well, we sort of had this running joke. He was always messing with us. And we had this running joke that the house was haunted because it's a 100-year-old house. So that was us joking. And she's trying to convey the idea that this was not a red flag. And in fact, even in retrospect, she still believes to this day that he was kidding when he was texting her about the house being haunted, because that was part of their running joke. So was it a red flag? The jury is really only going to go one of two ways. They're either going to find her credible, or they're going to say that you were not seeing what was plain and obvious there to see that everybody else could have seen except you.
This is the first time we've seen a case like this. Parents charged for a mass shooting that their child committed. Just how much is this case and the outcome going to impact whether we ever see anything like this again?
People should not think of this case as standing for the proposition that parents will be held strictly or automatically liable for anything that happens with a firearm in their home. In fact, even one of the judges on this case in the appellate court said this is unique because it involves allegations that somebody, number one, recklessly disregarded their son's mental health issues, and number two, recklessly allowed that person access to a firearm. Those two facts are exceedingly rare. So but I will say this. Our culture has shown an increasing acceptance of the idea that we hold parents responsible for their children's access to firearms. This is something that 100 years ago, mental health and the independent act of an independent actor would cut off causation. So negligence would be completely removed and you would only blame the shooter. But things seem to be changing.
And mental health is almost always, it seems like, the issue with these school shootings, too. So.
Exactly.
All right, Danny, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.